What's up, guys, and welcome back to another pre-match preview for what is definitely our biggest game in the past 8 years, the Champions League final against Man City in 2 days' time. And boy, am I absolutely bricking it. Now, obviously, heading into this game, our form has been pretty terrible. We've lost 3 of our last 4 games, which is obviously not great. But then again, it is a final, and we all know that anything can happen in a final. And we have had City's number the last 2 times we've played them. I think it'll be a pretty cagey affair with both teams being very solid defensively. In the Champions League, both City and us have only conceded 4 goals throughout the whole competition so far. I think obviously City will try to dominate possession, and I think that could play into our hands with us okay with sitting back and looking to get them on the counter. I think it'll be hugely important for us to try to get the first goal. Obviously, our form so far, when we've gone down a goal, has been pretty terrible. I also just think it'll help the game plan if we do get an early lead. It'll make Man City come at us, which should leave them more open on the break, which we can exploit in a similar fashion to the way we did in the FA Cup semi-final against them. Due to both teams being incredible defensively, I think there is a decent chance that this game goes to extra time and penalties. And obviously, Chelsea, we have a pedigree of penalties in the Champions League final. We've been on both sides of them. We've had the disappointment of losing in 2008 and then the glory of winning in 2012. Obviously, with our poor form over the last few games, I think it's thrown a spanner in the works for picking the starting 11. I think especially against Aston Villa, more players tried to play their way out of the starting 11 for the Champions League final than in it, which is strange. I think 2 examples of that were Pulisic, who was just quiet, and he has been quiet for the last 3 games, and Jorginho and Kovacic, who were just sloppy and really had awful games between them. However, one of them two has to play next to Kante, so that's a huge decision that I think Tuchel is going to have to make, as he simply isn't going to trust Gilmour in such a huge game, despite the fact that he has looked promising in the few games he has started under Tuchel. Despite us looking far better when we switched to the back four in the Aston Villa game, I just can't see Tuchel deviating from the back five and doing his best Guardiola impersonation by experimenting with other shapes. I think it would just be too risky and not worth it. And we've already seen some of his experiments not work out as successfully as intended. The Gilmour playing as the lone six comes to mind, as does switching Aspi and Reece James, which I'll get into later. I think in goal, Mendy absolutely has to start if fit. He did pick up that rib injury at Villa Park after colliding with the post in an attempt to stop the Bertrand Traore scuffed shot, and this subsequently led to him getting subbed off at halftime for Kepa. Him not starting in the final would be a huge blow for Chelsea, as our form defensively with him in goal this season has increased significantly from last year, where I think we conceded 50-odd goals in the league. He offers a psychological boost to the defense, as well as having better overall shot-stopping abilities than Kepa, especially from range, which we saw in the FA Cup final. Obviously, that goal, absolute screamer, not entirely Kepa's fault, but it does make you question whether Mendy would have got a hand on it, seeming as he does have the significant height advantage over Kepa. And Kepa does have previous for letting in long shots, and that doesn't bode well against any team with Kevin De Bruyne in it. I think the only upside to playing Kepa would be if the game did go the distance and we ended up going to penalties. He has previous for us in penalty shootouts against Frankfurt. He was the hero then. I think he also performed well in the penalty shootouts against Tottenham in the Carabao Cup 2 years ago. Obviously, we don't talk about what happened in the final with him during the shootout, but he does have pedigree for making saves and coming up clutch in penalty shootouts, which Mendy doesn't. I'm pretty sure his record throughout his career of saving penalties is pretty abysmal. But obviously, I don't think that's a reason to start Kepa in the final, and if Mendy's fit, you absolutely have to go with him. Earlier in the week, Tuchel did say that Mendy had made huge progress in managing the pain, and he seemed optimistic that he'd be fit for the match, and we have seen pictures of him training come out over the past few days. So I think, and I'm hoping and praying that he's fit enough to start. So I would go with Mendy and net in my predicted starting 11. Right wing back has somehow become one of the most contentious and hardest positions to predict during Tuchel's reign. He came in, and after switching to the 5 at the back, he immediately deployed Hudson-Odoi as a right wing back, which was a position we'd previously never seen him play. And after persevering with him for 5 or so odd games, where he looked a constant threat down that right-hand side, and he seemed to be building up a good amount of confidence and momentum, he then switched to playing Reece James as a more defensive option in the bigger games, with Hudson-Odoi switching to a rotation role, or an offensive sub off the bench. Good performances in those big games led to Reece James becoming the first choice starter over Hudson-Odoi in that position. And he also started to grow into that position and build momentum for himself, offering a nice balance between the offensive threat that Hudson-Odoi offered and the more defensively minded Azpilicueta. And he was really making that position his own in tandem with Chilwell on the other side after he had displaced Marcos Alonso. And then out of the blue, Tuchel switched it up again. I think in the game at home against Real Madrid, Tuchel started Azpi at right wing back for the first time with Christensen behind him. Obviously, this was a ploy to be more defensively solid, which was understandable at the time. However, this led to him experimenting with Reece James at centre-back and Azpi at right wing-back in subsequent games. And it's hard to see the exact benefits of this besides it being a direct counter to Jamie Vardy's pace in the Leicester games. I think it's been proven over the last 3 games that James is a better option at right wing-back than Azpi, who just doesn't offer the same crossing and ability to beat a man on the dribble with the pace that James has. And I think if both are in the starting 11, then there's no real reason for them to be switching position unless it was a direct counter for Jamie Vardy's pace, which I don't think City have a player in that mould that will be dangerous to us in that area. Because despite Reece James looking solid at centre-back and when he moved into central midfield against Villa, I just don't think those 2 positions get the best out of his qualities. And Azpi has also shown under both Tuchel and Conte that his best position, especially now his legs are starting to go, is that right centre-back position in a back 3. And for me, it's not a coincidence that as Tuchel has selected more defensive options over time, the output down the right-hand side has diminished exponentially. And I really think it's time to end the Azpi Reece James experiment and just start Reece at right wing-back. Obviously, Tuchel will be going with 3 centre-backs, and I think 2 of them are just no-brainers. For me, Rudiger and Silva are nailed on starters. Rudiger's been in his best form of his Chelsea career so far under Tuchel. And it's games like these that are the reason we signed Silva in the summer. He has that big game experience, that leadership. He's been there before. Let's not forget he was there last year in the final for PSG. Yes, I know they lost, but hopefully he'll be looking to redeem that this year and bring home the trophy for us. The right centre-back position is another interesting one where there's a few options that could be chosen. Obviously, there's Azpi, as I talked about before. I do think that is his best position. But I think Christensen's form this season under Tuchel has been extremely underrated. The only time I can think of where he's put a foot wrong was obviously in that Man City game where he made a mistake for the first goal that Sterling scored. But besides that, he's been incredible. He's been rock solid. And I also think he's probably been playing in his best form of his Chelsea career. But he's just been going under the radar because other players have been performing at just as high level. He did pick up an injury a few weeks ago and he hasn't played as much as he has before. And I think it's probably best, despite his little drop in form, that Azpi plays just for his leadership qualities. And I think it's always best to try to get your captain on the pitch, even if that just is a placebo effect. Left wing back is another position that just picks itself for me. I think there's no competition there. It has to be Ben Chilwell. I know Marcos Alonso had a spike in form when Tuchel first came in, but since then he's just fallen back into his same old ways and he's just looked slow. He's constantly out of position. He doesn't have the legs to get up and down and to press as effectively as Tuchel wants. And since he's been dropped from the starting 11, I think Ben Chilwell's form has increased exponentially and his performances. We saw what he did against Leicester when he came off the bench, and I just think he has to start this game. There's no way Marcos Alonso can start this game. Not even the height excuse that Tuchel seems to be using can work. Because Man City, they're not a team that put balls in the air. They're not a dangerous team aerially. So there's no reason for me personally to pick Marcos Alonso over Ben Chilwell. The central midfield, I think, is extremely important. This could be make or break for this game. If we get overrun in this position, I can see City just dominating us. So I think it's imperative that Tuchel gets the selection right here. Obviously, one of them, if fit, will be Kante. He's been pictured in training along with Mendy, and Tuchel has said positive things about him. So I think even if you have to do a Europa League tribute act, stick a cast on his leg, put a brace on his knee, whatever it takes, get him on the pitch, because without him, I think our chances of winning drop off hugely. The left centre mid position, though, is a tricky one. Obviously, Kovacic and Jorginho not playing their best football these last few games. Kovacic has just come back from an injury, so he has that as a semi-excuse. He's working his way back into form after I think he missed a month. But Jorginho's just looks sloppy, slow, off the pace. He looked pre-Tuchel Jorginho these last few games. I really don't know who to choose in this position. I really don't. I think Kovacic is a better player. However, every time he plays with Kante, he just doesn't put in the same performance as he does when he plays with Jorginho or if Jorginho plays with Kante. So it makes it really tough. I think Tuchel will start Jorginho, and I think I would also start Jorginho purely for the fact that I think if you need to make subs and you need to bring a centre mid off the bench, you definitely want to bring Kovacic off and to have that drive, the ability to beat the press, beat a man, get us forward, get us up the pitch. I think he would start Jorginho to try to get a little bit of control over the game. Obviously, he does occasionally get overrun, but if he's even able to grasp a little bit of control over this game and slow down City's momentum, I think that could be integral in us winning. So hopefully Jorginho's back on form and doesn't play like he's been playing for these last few games, because I think he could be a real game changer if he's on form. The front three positions are also fairly interesting. I think two of them are probably nailed on. I think Werner has to start. He's showed before that he's dangerous against City, and I think Tuchel trusts him, obviously. We all know he struggles in front of goal and how his finishing's been subpar, but I think teams like City are the teams that he thrives upon. He struggles against teams that sit deep, get 10 men behind the ball, and just soak up pressure. I think he could be integral to countering this City team if we're able to win the ball, release him quickly, which is something we've struggled to do all season. Constantly getting him the ball a few seconds late. It's not just the passes, it's also his timing of the run sometimes is poor, but there's also many occasions where the final ball is released at one touch too late, a few seconds too late. And with his pace, he's already 5 yards offside, gone. If we're able to really string those final third balls together and release him, I think he could cause damage against the City backline. So for that reason, I'd start with Timo Werner. In the second attacking midfielder position, I'd go with Mason Mount. This one is also a no-brainer. He's been our player of the season and definitely been our most consistent attacker, if not player in general. His ability to press is integral to the way we play, and his ability to drop in behind in the line between the defense and midfield and pick up the ball in the spaces in that hole is extremely useful. In all the games where we play well offensively, we have either Mason or Havertz, someone that is able to find space in between the lines and cause havoc, releasing Werner, releasing our other attackers, and driving forward. His ability on the turn is exceptional. We saw that against Porto in the final third, where he turned the centre back and then fired it in low. The only criticism I have of him over these past few weeks is his finishing has been a little bit subpar. He missed a chance against Aston Villa on the weekend. He missed a big chance against Real Madrid. I know he's finally scored in the end, but his finishing could, and his decision-making in the final third could use a little bit of work. But obviously that same critique could be filed at any of our attackers. This final position in the front three, I think, is one that's probably going to have the most conversation surrounding it from Chelsea fans. Many people calling for Giroud. I think there's absolutely zero chance of that happening. He hasn't played any games. You're not going to bring him in for the final. I think he doesn't press effectively enough. He slows down the play. Obviously, probably our best finisher, but our general play with him on the pitch is always significantly worse than when we have a more fluid front three, in my opinion. Pulisic is another one that people are going to be calling for. For me personally, as I said before, I think he's managed to play his way out of the team these last few games. He's been extremely quiet. I know he's been playing on the right, which for me is just, I don't understand it. Every time he plays on the right, he puts in subpar performances, and when he plays on the left, he looks absolutely deadly. I think Werner's going to start on the left, so he won't start on the left. So for me, I wouldn't start him, not only because he's drop in form, but also just positionally. Whenever he plays on the right, he plays significantly worse than when he plays on the left. People will make arguments for Ziyech, and I think Tuchel could potentially start him as well. Him and Werner just have a great chemistry for when we play counter-attacking football. The second leg against Atletico Madrid and the semi-final against Man City in the FA Cup. But for me personally, even in both those performances, I know he bagged the winning goals in both those games, but this formation just doesn't suit him, and the two number 10 positions don't suit him either. He just looks sloppy. He looks a little off the pace for me. I know he did look improved off the bench against Aston Villa, and I was actually surprised. He looked like he cared and was going to put effort in, which makes a nice change. But for me personally, I just wouldn't start him. I think there's better options, and he can always be a dangerous option that we use off the bench. If we need to switch to a back four, he can play on the right and we can get that goal. So for me, in my predicted team, I'd go for Havertz up front. He looked extremely good after coming off the bench against Villa. I know he missed a few good chances, but he just really knitted the attack together, and that's something I think he does exceptionally. He pulls defenders around, he finds space, he collects the ball. He's his speed is extremely underrated, as is his aerial ability for me. I think he's the perfect combination. Obviously, his direct dribbling ability is not the same as Pulisic, and his aerial ability is not the same as Giroud, but I think there's a nice middle ground there that he finds, especially when he plays up front. And despite the blip against Arsenal, he's also been in extremely good form for I would say the last 3 or 4 odd months, putting in good performances against Everton, Fulham, Real Madrid, just to name a few. And I think not only due to his solid performances, but just the lack of performances from other attacking players in the team, I'd start him up top. That's the starting 11 I would go for. I'm praying that the boys will do enough to get it done. I'm extremely nervous, but I have a bit of belief. We were the underdogs in 2012. We're the underdogs again. I think we can do it. Come on, the boys. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like. If you're new around here, subscribe to stay up to date. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in 2 days, hopefully celebrating the Champions League win.